We are so happy to join the Earth Day 2022 virtual stage. I'm Sanchali Pal, the founder and CEO of Joro, an app that helps you track your carbon footprint based on how you spend money. And I'm here with Kristy Drutman, who's also known as Brown Girl Green. And we're here to talk about our spending and how it connects to the climate. Hey, Kristy.
Hi, everyone. I'm so happy to be here. Happy Earth Day.
I have a question that I want to talk about, which is something we talk about a lot, I feel like on social media and in general, which is whose responsibility is it to solve the climate crisis?
I would say that it's technically everyone's responsibility in their own way, but I would say particularly companies and businesses who could actually be able to address the large amount of greenhouse gas emissions that are polluting the atmosphere right now. I think that they should be held the most responsible for driving the climate crisis and to come up with solutions that actually make interventions easier and make choices more accessible to consumers who are already trying to, go through their day-to-day lives.
Absolutely. It's so interesting because, I mean, the majority of global emissions is actually driven by consumption, and companies are on one side of that. They're the ones producing all of the products and services that we as consumers are using.
Definitely. I think there is sometimes this feeling of like it's solely on the consumers or the individual. And yes, I think to some extent we should have awareness and be aware of like the choices we're making and how that's connected to the impact it has on the planet. But I think we also need companies and people that have positions of power to be taking that responsibility as well. And so with that being said, I wanted to ask about, the link between spending and climate change. Spending is something people don't realize as a climate action. Could you speak a little bit more to that to start off with?
Yeah, for me, that was something that was really eye-opening as I was starting my sustainability journey and trying to think about what are my levers for change. I can vote in elections, I knew that. I can organize or I can be an activist, but I didn't really think about the role that my daily spending has to do with my consumption. Household consumption influences 65% of global emissions because all of the things that we use in our lives require energy to produce. We see that when we fill gas in our cars, or sometimes maybe when we get our utility bill, but also the clothes we buy, the food we eat, and even some of the financial choices we make are ways that we can have an influence on global emissions, which I think is actually hugely powerful. A lot of people get scared by that or worry that it should make them feel guilty. And it's absolutely not our fault that the climate crisis is happening, but that doesn't mean we're powerless. And I think taking control over the choices that we have that do influence global emissions can be super empowering.
And how,
Um,
how does your work on Joro provide that access to people? Because that's really an amazing tool that you've developed to be able to make that more accessible to consumers to engage with this work. So could you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So the app Duro is in the App Store or Play Store. Anyone in the US or Canada can download it now. You can connect your credit or debit cards, your spending accounts to the app, and we'll automatically calculate the emissions behind everything you buy. So whether you spend like $30 at the gas pump or $100 on groceries, we'll take information about national emissions, local emissions, and your personal preferences like your dietary habits. And we'll include that in a personalized carbon footprint estimate. So you can see and manage your carbon just as easily as you manage your finances. And then in the app, there's lots of actions you can take. You can connect with other people who are also taking action. You can read or start a sustainability challenge to lower emissions in some part of your life, or you can subscribe to offsets that we curate and vet for you so that you know they're higher quality. So the app basically allows you to track, reduce, and offset everything you buy.
And could you explain a little bit more about how the app kind of moves away from like the shaming aspect and is more about like empowering people to take action? Could you talk a little bit more about how you all frame that narrative to encourage people that they're making a difference by using the app rather than making them, feel bad for maybe contributing to X, Y, and Z emissions?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like so much of the narrative we hear is like, either I can skip the straw, which like doesn't really matter that much, but is super easy, or I have to move to the woods and not participate in the fossil fuel economy at all. And the reality is like we all need to live in society together, and we need to draw down our societal emissions together so that we're eventually living in a zero carbon economy. And that's kind of how we frame it at Joro, is like your actions are part of this sustainable shift towards a more green and regenerative and just world that we all want to be a part of, that we can use our spending choices to live more sustainably. It doesn't mean no one can reduce their emissions to zero until we have no fossil fuels left. But we frame it as finding your levers for impact, developing a carbon intuition, sort of getting access to carbon information so that we all understand the costs of the choices that we're making and we're able to act on them. But Joro is really about meeting people where they are. It's not about trying to force a specific path. And that's something we really focus on in the app, is trying to figure out for you, based on your lifestyle, what is sustainable. And sustainable means like you can sustain it and it sustains life on Earth.
Yeah, and when we're talking about issues around like wealth inequality happening in the world today, spending is such a personal and very like intimate part of people's lives these days. People are very, very protective over their finances and what they're doing. So I'm just wondering, like, how do you feel like Joro as an app can also make people feel like, have a more positive relationship with their finances by knowing that, maybe they're spending their money in a way that is making a difference. Could you talk a little bit more about that too?
Yeah, so many people feel like, actually, I just saw a study the other day that like 70% of consumers under the age of 40 feel guilty about the way that they consume. And that's so difficult and terrible, because obviously we can't control all of the supply chains that are out there, but we can say vote with our dollars for the ones that we like best. And so we try to help people. We also have like articles about climate anxiety and how do you deal with that? How do you start conversations about climate, which is a huge thing that you can do even before you're ready to take action, and sort of recognizing there's no perfect path. Like if you want to start with offsets and that's the way you want to start, that's all right. If you're going to buy offsets, you got to do it with ones that really are making a difference, and you have to accept that they're not a license to pollute. The way we do that is we link it to your actual emissions. So it's actually more like a carbon tax, where you're saying, I'm going to emit a certain amount and I'm going to pay to offset that amount. And then if I emit less, I pay less. So using it more like a price on carbon. And so we try to create these like positive reward mechanisms, encouragement tools, and also just like accepting people where they're starting.
Yeah, and I think it's really awesome also to see, more women of color in this space of, the intersections between environmental advocacy and education and technology. And so I'm just wondering, like, in your opinion, as a woman of color, like how do you feel like your position in leadership is kind of changing the message around where, I guess you could say climate tech or environmental technology is going? I would love to hear more of your perspective as a founder. Yeah.
I've it's been a really hard journey to be a solo female founder of color starting this business, also in a space that's kind of unproven. I think in the world of business, like starting a social impact business still seems like a little bit unusual. And so I would say that it's been really challenging. I've gotten so much mentorship and support from other women of color, from other people of color in general. And that's been really amazing to me. Also to see how the founder community supports other founders, because they know what it feels like to go through this really difficult journey. And I've realized how important it is to be intentional about bringing diversity into our work and to our team. Being a woman of color actually really helps, like in terms of recruiting people who are more diverse, but I still have to be really intentional about it, because it's so easy, especially at a small company with limited resources, to not prioritize that. And I've been really lucky to have early hires on the team who also really prioritize that. I think that's like such a critical part of thinking about who you bring onto the team. And then also just generally like looking around, the climate tech sector is pretty white and pretty male. And it's so important that climate solutions are being built by a diverse coalition of people who represent the diversity of people around the world who need climate solutions. So that's something I started getting interested in climate because of my work in Ethiopia and India. And I think it's really important that people who have those experiences on the ground, seeing the effects of the climate crisis and working with people who are dealing with them, are actually building solutions as well.
Amazing. And I think my last question is just like, You had referenced that like certain, carbon offsets can be greenwashing. And I think it's a really important thing on Earth Day, because we hear carbon offsets and net zero thrown around like, I don't know, yesterday's cookies. And so I just wanted to know, like, from your perspective, like, how do we suss out, the real impacts of reducing our carbon emissions versus the greenwash, and how does Joro address that on the app as well?
It's very true. And I think it's so important to share that so many offsets are not doing what they say to do. They're not reducing or removing the carbon they claim to, or they're causing other harmful effects for communities or for local ecosystems. But that doesn't mean that all carbon offsets are bad. It means that we have to do a lot of work to try to find the projects that are really doing good and try to support those projects. So that's what we actually did not want to be doing that work. We thought maybe we could work with someone else to do that evaluation process, but we found there was no one else who was doing meaningful evaluations on both the integrity of the carbon removal and the biodiversity and the environmental justice effects. So we do those analyses ourselves and with the board of experts. And we look for projects that would not have happened without people's money. So they're additional. You can guarantee that they're happening for the period of time they need to happen to reduce or remove that carbon. They're permanent. They're evaluated by trustworthy third parties, and they're transparent in the information they share. So we do a lot of analysis to make sure that's happening. And then we also look at how are they including local communities? Are they lifting them up? Are local communities getting income from these projects? Are they included in the decision making? And then also, are they considering local ecosystems, trees and species around there, for instance, is really relevant for forestry. And we have a variety of projects. Like, a lot of people are just aware of forestry projects, but there's so many innovative things happening to reduce and remove carbon. We have one amazing seaweed project with Running Tide in Maine that's using kelp farms to sequester carbon. We are working with an organization called Charm Industrial, which is actually taking agricultural waste, turning it into bio-oil and injecting it back into the earth. So many amazing innovations, and it's really beautiful to see all of our community being able to support those projects at the same scale as major companies are able to when we combine our demand.
Amazing.
I was curious because a lot of people say that we are powerless to make a difference, and there's like sort of this question about what can one person do, because I'm just one person. What do you tell people who say, I don't matter, nothing I do matters?
I would just say that you come from a unique community and perspective that only you can speak to when it comes to communicating the climate crisis. And I think that you don't have to have like tons of followers, or you don't have to like build the largest community, but as much as you intentionally invest in your community, the more you're going to see the impacts of that come back to you. I think that no person is powerless. I think that it's going to require a collective, and it's going to require relationship building, and it's going to require large swaths of people to continue putting pressure on industries and companies and political leaders who are not, doing the work that they need to do to address this crisis in the time they need to. But I think that if you are one person with the intention and the passion to want to make a difference, there's so many other people that are there with you, and you're not alone. And I think that getting caught in just this fallacy that is all on you and you as a person alone, it's just not true. And so we need people to harness their collective energy to create the momentum they need in their own context. And I think we're going to continue to see those shifts if more people tap into their own talents and power in that way.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's such a good distinction, is that it feels so isolating when you say me, but when you start saying we, then it's really powerful, and it doesn't have to feel so isolating. And in fact, when you think back to other major movements like the civil rights movement, nothing has ever happened except for when a small group of people who are really passionate decide to change. And actually, that was a really interesting part of the recent IPCC report, in which they talked about it just takes 10% to 30% of people to create societal shifts. And that's going to be a really critical part. Demand-led solutions, consumer-led solutions is going to be such a critical part of getting to our net zero targets. So thank you so much. This was really fun to talk to you about this. Happy Earth Day. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of the day.
Thank you, everyone.